Begin this morning, as I was saying during the children's sermon, we've been working through this series for this past month, and it's been, sketchy because we haven't canceled, but we've had two p.m. services, and the snow's been pretty hectic, and this might be some of y'all's first time even being here this year because of all of that. So I want to sort of just give a recap of what we've been talking about, and hopefully in a new light, so that if you have been here every time, it'll still be something new to you. But I want to just give a big picture of what I'm going to be covering this entire year. And all of my sermons are going to be connected to this big picture. And I think as the American church, we often fall into the trap of believing it's all about us. As in believing it's all about this church. And I know many of you can relate to that and viewing other churches and seeing how other churches work. It's all about them. All of their money goes toward their programs. All of the things that they do go to enrich their members. And it's very rarely about the people outside of their church. So my goal throughout this entire year is to get us to see a bigger picture. The big picture of God that's going on around us. Because so often we just see the little picture that is us, and not the big picture that we can be a part of. So, as that is an overarching theme, that's what we're going to be viewing. And I started out with this sermon series, Why is it so hard to spread Christianity? To get us to see that we're doing something wrong. That as the American church, as this church in particular, we have some attitudes that are wrong that's prohibiting us from spreading Christianity as effectively as we possibly can. As effective as it can be. And as it is in so many other countries around the world. I was reading a statistic that says Africa gains over 5,000 new believers every single day. That's amazing. Now, I would probably go as far as to say that America loses 5,000 believers every day. Now, that's definitely not a fact by any means, but I would not be surprised to hear something like that. But the purpose of this series is to show us that we're doing something wrong and hopefully get us to a point of admitting that we're doing something wrong. Whenever you have a problem, whenever you have some kind of addiction or something, the first step is to admit that you have a problem. And it's only from admitting it and from seeing our problems that we can change those things and make them better and make them so that we can become more effective. And so that's the whole purpose of this series. And today, to wrap this up, I want us to get us to understand this one thing. And we all know it, but to really try to understand it and try to understand what it means makes a big difference. And it's this. Saying and doing are two different things. Saying and doing are two different things. Now, we all know this. We all in our hearts know that that's right. We know that saying something and doing something are definitely two different things. But that brings us to our scripture this morning. And I think I might be taking it a little bit out of context, but I think it makes sense and I think we can see the parallel. So here we are at the Last Supper. Jesus is having this Passover meal with his closest and best friends. And then he calls out Judas. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. Judas leaves. The emotions are high. And Jesus starts teaching again. He says, I give you a new commandment, love one another. And by this, by you all loving one another, that is how people know you're my disciples. And then he says, I'm going somewhere and you can't follow me, but one day you'll be able to follow me. And then Peter speaks up, and you can imagine the emotions that's happening in this place. Peter speaks up and says, Lord, I want to go where you're going right now. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there right now. I'm willing to lay my life down for you right now. A very emotional response that Peter gives. And I can just imagine Jesus looking at him. And I can't help but just thinking that Jesus is probably amused at this point and says, listen, Peter, not only will you not lay down your life for me, you're going to disown me 3 times before tomorrow. I can't imagine what the other disciples were just thinking to themselves at that moment. That here's Peter, the person that we know that Jesus said his church is going to be built upon. Peter, Caiaphas, the rock. Here's one of our leaders, one of Jesus' closest friends, and he's calling them out like this. And I can't help but to see the relation in that in so many of our lives. You know, I think we often say we're willing to do whatever it takes. As a church, as individuals, we're willing to say, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. If I really think you're calling me to do something, I would do it. I think as a church, we claim that. I think every church claims that. I don't see how they could call themselves a church if they didn't claim that. Remember a couple of weeks ago, I presented this to you, and I said, what if we felt that God was calling us to sell this church? Take all the money that we made and give it to charity, and start having church on the front yard of the parsonage. If we really felt God was calling us to do that, would we do that? And I hope that got you to think that chances are we probably wouldn't do that. I can imagine an administrative board meeting when that gets brought up. Hey, I think we need to vote on something. Let's sell the church. I can't even imagine. You could definitely hear a penny will drop in that moment. And then you're thinking, how can we get rid of Harrison? Because something's wrong with him. But I hope that gets you to think about that. If you felt God was calling you to the ministry today, would you be willing to quit your job? Would you be willing to give up your retirement to go and to do His work? If you really are willing to say that you're willing to do whatever it takes. But saying and doing are two different things. And we learned that with Peter right here. He says he's going to do something, and of course we find out that saying and doing are two different things. I think that's why it's so hard to spread Christianity. If we could get to that point, if we could boil everything down, it's because of that. And one of the arguments and the things that I brought up came from this book that we've been incoherently focused on throughout this series. And it's called Unchristian, What a New Generation, talking about my age group from 16 to 29, what a new generation really thinks about Christianity and why it matters. And I want to just give out some couple of statistics that they found. 10% of outsiders in my age group, outsiders being people that don't go to church, people that are not Christians, that claim they're not Christians, 10% of those people have a good impression of born-again Christians. That's it. 10%. And this book's just filled with statistics that are eye-opening like that, but here's just another one. Whenever they were asked to give, what are some images you think about Christianity in the church? 2 of the top 3 answers given was judgmental and hypocritical. And we've covered those over the past few weeks of what those things actually are, how they apply to a Christian and things like that. But if you could sum up what judgmental, hypocritical, why people have a bad impression of Christianity, is because Christians are notorious for saying they do certain things and not actually doing them. See, it's one thing to say you're a bad person and act like a bad person. It's a completely different thing to say you're a good person and act like a bad person. And I think that's what's hurt Christianity so bad. And, it only takes one apple to spoil the whole bunch. And out of this whole church, we can just have one person say they're a good person and act like a bad person, and it ruins the image of this entire church. So pretty much that's what the first part of this sermon series was about, to get us to open our eyes to the things that we're doing wrong. And then I sort of changed gears a couple of weeks ago and gave something that we can do right. And it focused on what are the basic fundamental changes that we can change. What are the things, the fundamentals that we can change that will make spreading Christianity more effective. And I gave this example of Scripture when Jesus gave 2 commandments. He said, these are the most 2 important commandments that you could ever know, that you could ever live by. And it was what? The first one is love God with all your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. And he said the second is like it, love one another as yourself.